Welcome to Felony Miami, where we have real conversations with real people about the criminal justice system in the United States.
Well, it's early in the morning, then when I ride, Lordy mama. Well, it's early in the morning, then when I ride. Well, it's early in the morning, baby, when I ride, baby, help me down, help me my right side.
There's blood in the mud, cocaine in the evidence room, and millions of pages of arrest reports. To say that there's been a lot of crime committed in Miami is the understatement of the century. When it comes to solving crimes and closing cases, our three guests today are experts in the field. Real-life Miami Vice investigators. Surveillance, interrogation, pursuit, physical evidence, testimony. From fraud to drugs to murder, South Florida is a criminal's paradise. We don't quite know why, but it probably has something to do with the hot sun, the sexy people, fast cars, million-dollar homes, and fresh Colombian marching powder. The desperate and the innocent can get swept up along with hardened criminals in this fast-paced subtropical city. Sometimes it's not easy to tell the good guys from the bad guys. And when there is injustice for one, there is injustice for all. Welcome to Felony Miami. Let's air it out. Hello and welcome back to Felony Miami. I'm your host, Joe Stone. And in today's program, we have three guests, three heavy hitters. To my right, we have Ramesh Nyberg. Ramesh is a 27-year police veteran, having spent 22 years as a homicide investigator with the Miami-Dade Public Police Department. And he holds the high standard that he keeps for his law enforcement. He holds himself to that same standard in his work today with his private clients. He works with wrongful death lawsuits, criminal defense, family court matters, non-compete, insurance fraud, background checks, and his NSI dossier is packed with powerful skills. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And directly across from me today, we have Stephan Lopez. Stephan is a Cuban-born immigrant who came to this country at the age of 7 and was raised in Miami. Stephan is also a former police detective and a former patrol officer, and he has investigated many criminal cases, including homicides, robberies, sexual batteries. Stephan is a former prosecutor for the Miami-Dade County Prosecutor's Office. This is an amazing career for a young man. The largest prosecutor's office in the state of Florida and the fourth largest in the nation. Stephan has also served and continues to serve as a special assistant public defender, handling a variety of serious juvenile and adult cases, including career criminal and murder cases, both in Miami-Dade and Broward counties. And Stephan has a saying that, quote, "I can't stand by and watch injustice." We agree with you on that one. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to my left, Roger Martinez. Roger is the founder and CEO of Global Investigative Solutions, Inc. in Miami, Florida. GIS, Inc. is a full-service private investigation firm helping law firms and third-party administrators, insurance companies, self-insured, and the general public. Roger has conducted insurance-related investigations throughout the United States and Puerto Rico. And prior to becoming a private investigator, Roger was a member of the most prestigious branch of the armed forces, the United States Marine Corps. As a sergeant and squad leader in the Marine Corps, Roger was in charge of a 12-man team and conducted amphibious missions in the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. Thank you for your service. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. So you guys have all seen some heavy stuff, some heavy action. You guys have been in the shit. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to throw this out there. Whoever wants to pick it up first. What's the most heinous crime you've been involved in investigating?
Well, it's hard to choose. There was a lot, but I recall a triple murder that we handled up in Palm Springs North. They used to call it Palm Springs North, where two elderly people were beaten to death with a hammer. And then their son was shot to death in front of his son. So anyway, it was a real chaotic type of a case, but we got it closed.
Yeah. How do you come across those things and then deal with them? They stick with you?
They stick with you. It's I guess you're so focused on doing a good job at the time, and you're trying to make sure everything is done properly and done well, that you don't really have time to dwell on the horror aspect of it. But I just came in touch with the young man that got wounded and survived in that case. Many years. This was a 1987 case, and he contacted me last year, and he's doing very well.
Amazing.
Saw his dad killed right in front of him, but he's turned out to be a good kid.
That is horrifying. And they caught the murderer?
Yes.
And what was his story?
He's serving life.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How long did that case take you to get from the incident to a conviction?
From the incident to conviction took about a year and a half. No, not even that long, because he ended up actually pleading. He was facing the electric chair, which we used to have the electric chair, but he took a plea, pled to 3 consecutive life terms to avoid the electric chair. So we actually wrapped it up within months.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's horrifying. Stephen?
The most bizarre case, the most heinous case I ever saw was a murder where they charged the body that I investigated. Where they killed the person and they charged the body. It turned out that they burned him alive, because they can determine based on the smoke in the lungs whether the person was breathing at the time. It was an elderly man, and 82 years old, and he was on dialysis. So it was the type of senseless homicide that just sticks with you. And then you think about your own family, and that's you got to separate your own emotions from those moments. But it just gives you pause, and to think that there are people amongst us that live and breathe the same air that we do, that are capable of doing that to someone. It's not like the typical homicide case where 2 guys get involved in a fight, or a lover's triangle, where one pulls out a gun and shoots the guy in a moment without thinking. This is a premeditated, heinous crime against someone who's probably the most vulnerable of all victims, other than a child. It's that person on dialysis. I mean, not that he was living a great life to begin with, and that's how they
might have been his great life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who are we to judge?
Exactly.
That one stuck with you. Did they caught the
person was apprehended, but the person had committed other murders, so he never really paid for that murder. He was apprehended in another county for a triple homicide that he committed in that county. So a lot of times when you have multiple murders, people get caught in a jurisdiction, and that's the jurisdiction that usually leads in the prosecution.
So you didn't have anything to do, or did they just add that case on? How does that work?
They usually add the case, and they did add the case. The case was not resolved when I left law enforcement back in 2006, but he was already facing the death penalty on the other counties' cases.
Right. And where is that person today?
I believe he's on death row.
What is the status of Florida with capital punishment right now? You said we used to have the electric chair. Did they change that to lethal injection? Or?
Yes, it's lethal injection now.
They considered the death penalty by electric chair. I guess it was too cruel. And so that changed. And, there's always litigation. That's probably the heaviest litigated area of criminal law is, there's always people trying to change either the sentencing scheme as it applies to the death penalty. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of changes over the last 20-something years, 30 years of the death penalties. Juveniles were, in 1989, Stanford v. Kentucky, they sentenced a juvenile to death in 2006 in the case Roper v. Simmons. That eliminated juveniles from being, offered the death penalty. Mm-hmm. They can no longer be executed.
Right.
and then you have, the mentally ill cannot be executed. At one point, that was also happening, and then certain states have different methods of execution.
Right.
So,
You would think that the people committing these crimes must be mentally ill, though. I mean, that's, it doesn't seem like a...
I think that there are people that are just bad people that do bad things because they like to victimize others. And we hate to think that there are people like that, but
Yeah.
I've sat in the interview room with them for hours, and there are people that like to take advantage of others and like to victimize others. They get pleasure from it.
Yeah.
Whether they're mentally ill or not, I'm not a psychiatrist, but
Yeah.
Their motives are different, and they can sit there and talk to you about normal things, and they will seem sane.
And then they do some crazy, horrible stuff like that. You, Roger.
Well, the most heinous insurance case that I've seen or worked on would have to be, the workers' comp cases. Workers' comp cases are, the reason why I say workers' comp is because workers' comp usually are the cases that last the longest. A person can be on workers' comp for 10, 15 years. And usually when a person's on workers' comp, they're milking the system. So they are collecting money for 10 to 15 years. So these people, we collect enough evidence to show that, yeah, they are okay. They're not hurt. They're going to work. When they're not supposed to be working. And these cases eventually they get crossed over to the criminal investigators, Miami-Dade County or whatever county you're working on, and those eventually turned on. They get to criminal investigations. And they get turned on to the criminal investigators. They go on to their locations. They do their stuff, and we move on to other cases.
Right.
As far as what goes on, what if they serve time with that, we don't know, because they move on with their investigations, and the insurance investigators move on with other cases.
Right. So, but like on these work comp cases or these insurance fraud cases, what's like some of the most ridiculous fraud that you've seen being perpetrated on the system?
In workers' comp, you're on workers' comp because you got hurt at work. Right. And you're sitting at home, supposed to be sitting at home collecting money. And what these people usually do is they usually end up working somewhere else. It's at dead-end jobs or under the table. They can't be paid over the table because they can see, a paper trail.
Right.
So a lot of these people are working, under the table for somebody else, or they trying to stay under the radar.
Right. Right. And then like insurance fraud, that would be if somebody's claiming, oh, I got hit by a car and I hurt my neck and I'm going to go to these one of these clinics.
Exactly.
How does that work? What is that all about? Because I know there is a thing that's been happening in the state of Florida with fraud. I think we're like number one.
Yeah,
we're number one.
Exactly. Florida is the capital.
It
is
is.
the fraud capital of the country. Yeah.
Wow. Is that because it's so transient here, or just because we
I
attract
don't know.
the smartest and the best?
I wish I had the answer. I don't know why, but it's just everybody comes here. They think that they could retire and live off the system.
What's the craziest fraud scheme you guys have ever seen?
Clinics. There's one scheme right now where these guys are setting up accidents. They'll come up to a family and say, hey, okay, meet me at this corner here at this time. And the guy will meet, the couple will meet the guy who's going to do it at this corner. They get out the car. The guy gets in the car. He crashes the car for them, gets out of the car, puts them back in there, and then they call the cops.
Oh, man.
and these are frauds that involve lawyers. I mean,
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
Lawyers, doctors.
Yeah.
Everybody's in on the fix. And Florida, I think we were trying to talk about that's one area of fraud in Florida that's very rampant. I mean, I've defended people accused of that in federal court. The Florida PIP laws are set up in a certain way.
PIP is personal injury protection.
Correct.
And Florida is also called a no-fault state.
Correct.
And so that's probably one of the things that helps propagate this whole fraud, because to my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the no fault means it doesn't matter whose fault it was, you can claim it to your insurance.
Absolutely.
Okay, go on.
And so, that's just one area of the law that's where fraud is perpetrated a lot in Florida because of like you said, the no fault. We do have 100,000 lawyers in Florida, and so personal injury is a very, very profitable industry. Insurance companies are very wealthy; they have a lot of money, and and that's not to say I'm not bringing discredit on the personal injury attorneys. 99% of them are honorable personal injury attorneys who actually receive the clients that come into their offices based on marketing. But you have those that are involved in the illicit solicitation of the clients that come in, and then there's the unwitting lawyer that has people making these false claims on the outside that they have no clue, and then they come into their office. So from their perspective, they're dealing with a legitimate accident victim who's claiming an injury.
Right.
But they don't know that the accident was staged from the get-go by people who are profiting, and they have clinics and doctors
Right.
and chiropractors that are making payments under the table. And
Now, I remember a lawyer explaining once, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, that the whole system for that fraud in this state is that with auto insurance, if you make just a basic claim, that there's a certain amount of money that you're going to get regardless, and that the lawyer is going to get X amount, the doctor is going to get X amount, and the people are going to get X amount.
Correct.
Yeah?
Yeah, there's a set amount, like I think it's like $10,000.
Right.
A set amounts that they break that up.
Right. So the lawyer's like, I'll take 3, the doctor will take 2, and you guys will get 5. Come on in with your accident.
Right.
And of course, there's some insurance providers, and then some for example, I imagine like a truck like UPS, they don't have the small limits. They may have an umbrella because they have a fleet of vehicles and they're in the commercial context, so they may have a larger pot to pick from. So it could be a legitimate accident, but perhaps the person wasn't really as injured, and then if anyone that's unscrupulous anywhere in that system involved in that case can get more from that insurance carrier.
While you were mentioning Florida being number 1 in fraud, I think it's probably worth mentioning. It's a little bit of a different aspect, but there's every kind of fraudster we can imagine here. And some of your listeners and some of us might have gotten calls from people claiming to be the IRS, people claiming to be police departments, and people should know that the IRS does not call you.
Right.
Police departments do not call you and tell you that there's some sort of, I heard, a civil warrant, which I started laughing, when I heard that. But I think one of the problems, or one of the victimology of South Florida, we have a lot of elderly people that have come here to retire. We also have a lot of people from other countries, and so all we can tell these people is get educated about the way things work. Get educated about how your government works, and you won't fall prey to that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. No, I remember several years ago I got one of those phone calls that the IRS had filed a lawsuit against me.
Right.
Now, I mean, it just so happens I was pretty sure that the IRS doesn't file lawsuits against people, but nonetheless, I hung up and I called my accountant. I was like, "Hey, what's up with this?" And he's like, "Dude, the IRS doesn't file lawsuits. Right. It's a scam." Mm-hmm. But you know what? Clearly, people get drawn into these things. This other one with the criminal, like the civil suit has been filed against you, and then the crazy thing is they ask you to pay these debts like with gift cards.
Yes.
Yeah.
That should be like a tip-off right away.
It should be, and the fact that they're doing it in such high volume means it's working for them. They're making God knows how many calls they're making with it, from some little basement somewhere, but they're getting people to bite.
Yeah. And people, as long as look, and the victimology of South Florida, and pretty much, in American culture is, in America we always want to invest our money, and we want that money to grow, and it's a capitalist society. So what really these people take advantage of is also in some cases, and this is the victim's fault, okay? is their greed.
Their greed, yeah.
Their desire to look. The truth of the matter is, as you know, because of the mortgage crisis that hit, you know, banks don't give you the type of return on your interest that they once did. I remember a time, there was a time where you got 5% if you had, you know, an account,
Like a CD.
like a CD account or what have you with the bank, but now they don't. So people always find a way to lure someone with the promise of a return, and people should get educated, like Detective Nyberg says. And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Okay.
Usually,
you know, you can get 2 for $1 at Burger King with a coupon, and maybe an extra set of fries, but that's about it. You're not gonna get, you know, you're not gonna get Burger King meals for the rest of your lifetime unless you enter a sweepstake that's at Burger King and you put the, you know, the ballot in.
So you guys have all been out there dealing with criminal types. I'm curious, has anybody ever tried to bribe you? Yeah? You're shaking your
Yeah.
head.
As a detective and as a cop, you know, the only thing that once or twice people did was, you know, just try to get me not to take them to jail. I've never had an official, as a cop, I never had an official bribe. I mean, threats that if I don't let them go, they're going to beat me up or whatever, but which is, you know, it's a crime in and of itself, depending on how it's, you know, addressed. It's called corruption by threat. But for the most part, no one said, hey, take this and I'll do this. As an attorney, that's happened once or twice. People, you know, want me to create something or some evidence or, you know, in a civil context. I'm remembering the person wanted me to create stock certificates for their corporation because they had lost them. And I explained to the person that that's a crime and that's illegal, and that I'm not going to fabricate any evidence for them. But for the most part, I was lucky. Of course, Detective Nyberg did about 18 more years in law enforcement than I did, so he definitely has more stories.
Yeah, how's your bribery record?
Only 2 incidents, and they're really small potato type incidents.
Okay.
I mean, and one was when I was a patrol officer. I was a rookie patrol officer, and I stopped this guy who was obviously a well-to-do businessman, and I was about to write him a ticket, and I was writing him a ticket, and he came and stood by my door, and after he left, I found this little business card holder on the floor with his business card in it and a $100 bill. So he had dropped that in there, you know, hoping I guess I was going to tear up the ticket. So I put it on a property receipt and impounded it. So he never saw it again. He never got it back, and because he couldn't go and claim it.
Right.
And so, you know, somebody, I don't know what happened. I know what happened to the $100 bill.
Kind of like a silent drop.
The other one was kind of a strange situation. You know, in homicide, we handled all kinds of death cases, homicides, suicides, accidentals. And suicides are always problematic because the families didn't want to believe it. The families would often argue against it. It's an embarrassing kind of a stain on the family name and that kind of thing. And this one guy he just didn't want to accept the fact that his son had committed suicide. And
How did he commit suicide?
he shot himself. And he called me and said, listen, and he was in tears, this poor guy. I mean, and he said, can you just change it? Can you just change it to an accidental death? I'll pay you $2,500. And I'm going, I'm not changing it. You know, I'm really sorry about your son's death, but I can't do that. And we never had this conversation, and goodbye. And I hung up on him.
Now, could he get in trouble for trying to offer you that?
Sure he could, but you know, you have to pick your battles. And
Right.
and this guy was just overcome with grief, and I wasn't going to pursue that.
Yeah. Have you ever been in court testifying in a case and had to maybe fudge something one way or the other, informationally, like just to convince the jury, like you knew it was a bad guy and you had to like say, well, yeah, I kind of.
I mean, I've had prosecutors ask me to say things that weren't 100% true, and I've said, you know, look, I'll testify to what I did, what I know, and if asked, I'll testify to an opinion. But you know, sometimes there are arguments against that. Outright lying on the stand? No.
Yeah. I had one case where the instructions were given to me. We were to go watch this lady, and the instructions that were given to me were she had a problem with her right hand. Her right hand, she couldn't move. The instructions that were given to me was her trigger finger. She couldn't move her trigger finger. She had her hand like a gun, and she couldn't move her trigger finger. That was the instructions that was given to our office. So we went out there. We got tons of video on this lady using her hand to grab stuff with her trigger finger and smoking a cigarette with her. So she was using her trigger finger the whole time. So we turned in our case, our evidence, and the client was super happy, ecstatic, great. Oh, we have this lady. We had tons of video. And then when the case went to trial, the instructions that were supposed to given to me was that she couldn't move her bottom 3 fingers. The only finger that she can move is her trigger finger. So the whole investigation was, we were watching the wrong fingers.
You were fingering the wrong guy.
Exactly. So basically we went to court, and the attorney found out what happened, and basically he told me to try and save this. And I got on stage, and one of the questions that the opposing attorney was asking me was, did I ever see her move the bottom 3 fingers? And I couldn't recall because we're here focusing on her trigger finger, and I didn't recall any time her moving her bottom 3 fingers. And I said, just to save the case, I just said yes. And he just went at me. And you just open up yourself for the attorney to just go at you, and he just laid in me, and until I finally I couldn't remember. In other words, I just basically said, I thought she did at one point in time, because it was like 8 hours of video. It was a lot of video, and I couldn't remember it. And then I just said, look, at this point, I can't recall whether she did or not use her bottom 3 fingers. My instructions were to keep an eye on her trigger finger, which we did.
Right.
And that case, we lost that case.
Yeah.
There are times when, and I know I've testified incorrectly several times where my memory maybe wasn't as good as it should have been. I remember a case where I testified. They asked me who had taken the hand swabs from the victim. All right, and I couldn't remember, so I said it was Detective so and so or whatever, however I answered. And are you sure? Well, that's my memory. Yeah, I'm sure. Which I should have said, no, I'm not sure.
Right.
But now I had to kind of stick with that. And he turned it into Detective Nyberg's lying. And that's the way he approached the jury with it. And he lied. He even counted the amount of times I said, 11 times he lied on the witness stand. And it was a matter of, I was wrong. It was the wrong person. And, really in the end, what does it matter who took the hand swabs? And if I, if I got it wrong, I got it wrong. But, the hand swabs were taken. But that's what attorneys will do, right?
Yeah, and the problem, honestly, and look, having been a cop and a prosecutor dealing with cops as either victims or mainly my star witnesses on most cases, the one thing that I try to do, because what a lot of cops, where they make a mistake, and Detective Nyberg just hit that, is that, and by the way, even though he's retired, he'll always be a detective. Just like when a judge retires, they still call him judge. It's kind of hard to get.
Too formal for me, man.
People get, and this is witnesses, but it looks worse for police officers in Miami-Dade, because in Miami-Dade, there's always been friction between the police. There's been riots, and there's been things where there's a distrust of the police in some segments of the Miami-Dade community. And so what happens, though, is police officers deal with a lot of cases all the time. And yes, are some police officers fudging on their reports because they believe either they're pressured by a prosecutor to remember things because it's stronger for the case, or they're pressured by an older officer that's been there a long time and it's a younger officer, and I've seen that happen all the time. Or, like Detective Nyberg just said, sometimes you don't remember. All these things, years later, you go to trial years later, and you don't remember. And the worst thing that a witness could do is try to say an answer they're not 100% certain of because it can be misconstrued, and an attorney would. I always take my time. Before I call an officer a liar, I've done that one time and one time only, and I didn't call him a liar because I still think it's unprofessional to call a witness a liar or any derogatory terms. But you can establish that somebody's not telling the truth when it's black and white and there's evidence to the contrary. But the worst thing that a witness could do, and a lot of times it gets misconstrued from online, is just they're trying to remember and they think they remember, but they're wrong. And that's why it's always better if you're not sure to say, I don't recall, or I'm not certain, or it could have been this guy, or it could have been that guy, but I don't recall that. And like he said, it wasn't even a relevant or important issue because the evidence is either, there was evidence collected and it either showed the defendant was the person who committed the crime based on that piece of evidence, or it wasn't. So there's no reason. A lot of times cops get jammed up by talking about things that are not even relevant or material or won't change the outcome. Then the attorney will take that, and if they can establish that the officer is untruthful, then they start to question whether the investigation is based on truth.
Right.
Or
if
fact.
you guys are trying to set stuff up. Because, this whole state of our criminal justice system today, I guess, is stemming from a reactionary time in American history back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, when things were getting a little out of control. And now all of these aggressive measures are coming home to roost. And I guess Detective Nyberg you were on the force probably right after that. You came in a little later. I'm just curious, what were your marching orders and what were you told to do when it came to policing your neighborhoods? And were there any specific recommendations to go after certain groups of people?
Well, first of all, when I was a rookie police officer, I was in Opelika. So there was one predominant group of that area it was a black community. So, when somebody said, "Hey, you pulled me over because I'm black," we'd look at them and say, "Dude, look around. This is where I work." Right. So no. So we didn't target anybody in particular. There was so much crime going on, and I started in late 1979 is when I was on the street as a uniform officer. I remember our sergeant saying, "Get these guns off the street," and I remember him saying, "Hey, pat them down. If you didn't have reason to pat them down, pat them down. If they got guns, take them off the street. If we lose it in court, we lose it in court. Let's get the guns off the street."
So just take the guns away.
Right.
But now there's more guns than ever.
Well, per capita, I'm not so sure. Listen, the 70s and 80s were the crime rate was way more violent than it is today. We had, if you look at the violent crime rate,
do you
much
think
bigger.
that's because the cops went in and took guns off the street, or is it because it went in and took a lot of dark people off the street?
I'm not understanding the question. So,
well, it seems that our jails are filled with a lot of disproportionate amount of people of color.
Right.
And that is not the makeup of our community. The makeup of our community is proportionately white people.
Right.
So it just seems that there's an imbalance. So I'm curious, was it the guns or was it taking the black people off the street?
Well, I can only speak for the policing that we did and the police departments I worked for. We were never told to target anybody, black, white, Hispanic, or otherwise. We were told to go out and make the zone or district or wherever we were assigned to the safest place we could.
Right.
And to treat people fairly. Did we always treat people fairly? No, we didn't, because of individual personalities. You did have guys that were racist. Of course you did, and you still do. And that's because we're human beings, and those are hard to filter out.
Yeah.
I remember in the 70s and 80s, we had a lot of problems, issues with Colombians, with the cocaine cowboys.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of killings, a lot of drugs, and a lot of guns in the streets during those times.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I mean, if somebody was targeted, I would say Colombians coming into Miami were targeted for sure.
Right.
But with good reason. I mean, our murder rate was through the roof.
Went up huge. Yeah. I mean,
I
these
definitely think that blacks disproportionately are represented in the prison system. In some cases, in a lot of cases, look, the truth of the matter is race plays a factor, in people's perceptions. But it also, if I would probably venture to guess that the majority, and if you look at, and as a court-appointed lawyer in a lot of cases in Dade and Broward, the majority of my clients are black, but they are also poor. That's why they're getting a private lawyer that's court-appointed from a wheel of lawyers to handle this type of case.
But there's a lot of poor white people too.
There is a lot of poor white people, and that's a valid point that you're making. I just know that a lot of my clients live in drug-infested neighborhoods where some of them are in for crimes that they actually didn't commit, but were with the people who committed the crime.
Right. So a part of this was this war on drugs, and I guess you were in it, Detective Nyberg, before the whole wave of the war on drugs. Seems like you, Officer Lopez, were there, rocking it out in the drug war time, right?
Well, I would say subsequent because, I guess Detective Nyberg was in homicide during the real war drug days, which were during the cocaine cowboys in the early 80s. I remember when I lived with my father for a brief period of time because I grew up with my mother. I remember in front of his house, there was these guys, they shot it, this guy died in my dad's arms because, it was a drug deal gone bad and they were all Colombian. And the guy told my dad, don't let me die. But this was common during that era, in the middle of the street. They, kind of like reminiscent of the movie Scarface. That scene in Detective Nyberg was certainly, I'm a little bit younger than Detective Nyberg, but not by a lot. But I was growing up, and I would see that in the news and what have you. But, the scene, with Tony Montana and Scarface where they shoot the guy in the middle of Ocean Drive, that wasn't far-fetched from the truth that was going on in Miami. So I wouldn't say that I was there during the drug. I was there post those cocaine,
right,
as an officer post cocaine cowboy days.
But were you still being pushed to enforce these war on drug policies?
I was. I mean, our department, although it was a community policing department, they really wanted the drugs off the street, and a lot of the young kids were engaged in drug dealing and ecstasy was becoming very popular.
Do you guys think that there would be less violent crime if the drugs were made legal?
It's a tough question. I'm not so sure because people always try and get over no matter what the rules are. So, there's still people that are smuggling in untaxed alcoholic beverages, from place to place. I'm not saying it's a big industry, but I think you're always going to have a black market for something, right. And so, I personally believe you should legalize marijuana. I don't think it should be a criminal thing at all.
Did you ever let anybody go when they had some weed?
Oh yeah, many times.
You did?
Many times. It wasn't worth arresting them.
Right.
I mean, it just didn't make sense to take myself off the road for 4 hours, and take this like little bit of weed down to the property room and impound it and go through all that.
How about blow? You ever let people go for cocaine?
That was a felony. So, that's always been a felony. In New York, it's a misdemeanor to have a little bit of blow. I mean, I don't know if that's something, and what you're referring to is cocaine.
Yeah.
But, officers have discretion when it comes to misdemeanor offenses. If you stop someone who's impaired, and his wife hasn't had anything to drink, and you can easily cut the guy a break and let the woman drive home. Or if it's a young kid who's about to start the military, you can, pull the car over or tow it or, teach him a lesson, take the keys away and call someone home. So you have that kind of discretion. Now when it becomes a felony, the officer could be in trouble for, and there's always that whole thing where, someone can accuse you of tampering with evidence, or if the guy comes back and says, hey, he stole my drugs or whatever, something that's not unheard of in Miami policing,
right?
In South Florida. But you definitely don't want to, get yourself in a jam over cutting a break to someone who was breaking the law at a felony level.
Right.
You know, and I wanted to touch base on what he said. And the question you asked Detective Nyberg about, will legalizing drugs make a difference? In some respects, if you legalize marijuana, I really believe, well, one thing is the court system will not be so bogged down with petty arrests, petty misdemeanors. People will be able to spend a lot less money on attorneys. The legal system will be better off. And the truth of the matter is someone who has 5 joints on them doesn't deserve to be put in the same cell with a rapist, a child molester, a killer, to potentially be exposed to physical harm during the 4 or 5 hours he's going to do time at the jail.
I mean, I think so many people agree with that. It just seems like a common sense thing. But who's fighting against it? Who's the ones out there fighting against that?
Well, there's some opposition. I mean, there's some states that are more liberal than others. Florida is a little bit more conservative, although it's, the pendulum is changing to more progressive, or I guess more moderate or more liberal towards one end of the spectrum. But, I think, to answer your question candidly, I don't think it'll change. Just legalizing drugs itself won't change the dynamics, because I honestly believe, and I've been to Amsterdam, and I've been to where people smoke marijuana down the street, but the people there are different people than here. First of all, most of the people in Amsterdam are Dutch. Here we have a mecca of different cultures, people from different countries with different values.
Yeah.
And we have, I think that the real problem with crime stems with, the values people are taught at home, the location where people live that are crime infested, locations where learned behavior by kids that really don't have as much opportunities as a kid that's growing up in Weston or Bonaventure. I think that has a lot more to do with crime and the violent tendencies that we in American culture have as a culture. I mean, you don't see that in other countries, besides the fact they're homogeneous societies, mostly, and they're educated, and the level of education is higher in some of those countries.
That used to be an important thing in this country, and seems like somewhere in the 60s or 70s, a bunch of politicians got together and said, we need to dumb these people down. They're getting way too smart for their own good. And then there's people like you guys that, rise above that. You go to law school, and you join the military, and you open an investigative law firm, and you're an officer. I mean, you rise above that. Has there ever been a case that you were involved in that you thought, wow, this would make a great movie or TV show?
Yes, several, and some already have. So.
Oh, okay. Which ones?
Well, I got involved in the investigation of the Winter Hill Gang out of Boston with Whitey Bulger,
okay.
Who ran probably the biggest crime organization in the Northeast for a long time, because one of the murders was down here. So our department got involved in that. There have been a couple movies and several books already written about that.
Yeah.
It was an very interesting case. It was really a Boston-based case that just happened to have a segment down here. And then a couple others that were just unusual and weren't necessarily street level. They were more like intelligent people that were scheming and ended up getting in a murder case. So it would lend itself to the screen, I guess.
Yeah. Can you tell us? A
there was a case of a British businessman who got murdered down here. He was investing a lot of money in a business that he thought was legit, but it was a massive fraud. It was they literally had a warehouse full of empty boxes that they showed him.
Oh, wow.
And they went to great lengths to perpetuate fraud on a lot of different investors. Well, this guy invested a lot of money, and when he started to realize that something wasn't right and ordered an audit, they decided to knock him off. And they lured him to the office under the pretense that he was going to meet someone who's going to buy him out. He got bought out, all right. He got a bullet in the back of the head.
Damn.
And they buried his body just west of our police department, actually, when it used to be all swamp out there in Doral. And really fascinating case. And we didn't have a body for about 2 years until we got one of those guys in and got him to confess, and he took us to the body.
You got him to confess?
Yeah.
How?
Skill.
Torture?
Absolute skill. One of the best investigators I ever.
Waterboarding?
Didn't do that stuff.
No?
No.
Just good old-fashioned
Stuff that holds up in court.
Talking, confidence game.
I mean, you have to know how to talk to people. You have to, and the investigator just passed away a few months ago, Greg Smith. Greg was just an amazingly good interviewer, and he got people to confess a lot because he was just very good at it, and spent 12 hours in the interview room with this guy.
And he gave up the location.
Yep.
And then who
Took
went
us
out
to
there?
the body.
You guys went out there to dig it up? Or?
Literally drained a swamp out there.
Really?
Yeah.
That's intense. You got any movie experience cases under your belt there, Stephan?
I've had a lot of cases that make the news, and the only case that I have that I think is worthy of a movie, it got a lot of coverage down here. From my understanding, it got more coverage. The only other case that got more coverage was there was a great story written in the Herald about it, and came out on a lot of news. It's a civil rights case. I do some police misconduct cases, and it involved the city of Miami Gardens and their former chief and racial profiling and stuff. So it was a case that we filed back in 2013, and it was settled. But the stories of the plaintiffs in that case, the officers involved, the supervisors, the whole thing with the city of Miami Gardens is noteworthy for a movie because there's a lot of storylines within the.
So the head of the police department in Miami Gardens was purposely racially profiling people in their area.
Well, the police department had a policy practice of stopping black males between the ages of 15 and 30 for the same reasons that we were discussing earlier, that there's a lot of crime in Miami Gardens. There's a lot of guns and drugs and stuff, but at some point they kind of lost sight of the real crime, and they just started enforcing petty crimes such as people drinking Unnatural Light at the park playing dominoes, or they were just harassing citizens, and there's a new chief, after they cleaned house in that case and the case was settled, the department has had less problems. They still have some problems, and, I work with other lawyers, and we have some cases still pending that I can't really talk about, but for the most part, their practice of just stopping black males that fit this age, whether they have probable cause or not, kind of, has stopped in the volume that it was,
So that is a real thing. It's not people's imaginations or just, sensitive people saying, oh, you're picking on us. It's actually a real thing.
It is a real thing. And the irony is that department was spearheaded by African-American people. So, the department's a mixture of African-Americans, white, and Hispanics. And African-Americans are not overly represented in the law enforcement community. But the leadership in that department in that city was African American. So, they were allowing this to happen. Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, they were just, as liable as the non-African American officers who didn't stop that. Yeah. And so, but that's like the one case that has always and will always stick out for me because that was something that you see in the movies. That's something from Hollywood. A lot of my criminal cases, some of them have been covered on the news, but for the most part, Detective Nyberg probably had that kind of case that Detective Nyberg is talking about is the one that maintains coverage. This is so often, unfortunately, we live in South Florida. We have a society where crime is so rampant that's the first 10 minutes of any news channel. So while my guy may have come out today and tomorrow, the media will move on to the bigger and better case.
The 24-hour news cycle. It's
horrible. I can't honestly tell you that my case is, you could talk to any lawyer in that same courtroom, and their client, they could write a story about their client.
Of course. How about you, Roger?
As insurance investigators,
Or how about in your military career?
That's another chapter here.
Yeah.
The worst thing I've seen in the military. Seen some. You're taking me back now. So helicopters exploding, bodies going everywhere, and us having to go and dig these things out of the swamp, and weeks later running through the same swamp, and your commanding officer telling you, "Be careful, there's still a torso out there." But as far as we went to Bosnia. My tour was from '94 to '98, and we had Bosnia in '96. But when we got to Bosnia, it was pretty much down. All we did was gator squares in the Black Sea, and just go up.
What's a gator square?
Basically, you're on a ship, and you're doing squares, waiting to get on land.
Okay.
And the ship is just doing a square until you do everything is taken care of on land, and whatever recons you're doing, reconnaissance, or if you're doing the trap missions, if there's a down pilot or something, and we got to go out there and pick up that pilot, the ship is just doing squares out in the sea, waiting for you to come back, and that's what we did. We just we were out there for 6 months. We did a bunch of gator squares. We did trap missions. There was a few pilots that were down in the Bosnia, and then they would send us out there, pick up the pilots, and bring them back in. And we did a lot of patrols and a lot of humanitarian actions. But the first story I told you with the helicopter crashing and everything, that was a training operation. That was a training operation before us going out there to the Mediterranean Sea. And it was a night operation, and all these guys, all these pilots, I don't know if you guys know, but pilots fly with night vision goggles at night. It's like they have these things on, and all they can see is black and green. And that's how they're flying up there. So I guess they didn't see each other, and helicopters crashed. There was bodies going everywhere. And
the helicopters collided in midair?
Yes. And the training op stopped, and all of a sudden we were ordered to pick up bodies. There was bodies everywhere. And like I said, for like weeks later, there was still torsos out there missing. But yeah, as far as war, as far as in Bosnia stuff, I got out in '98, so I got out before all the heavy stuff hit, like in 2001 when the Twin Towers came down. Okay. And I was already out of the military when that happened, and I feel for these guys that stayed in, because they really got to see some heavy stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, every other day there was bombings, people were, But as far as my experience, I had a great time in, and got to train some great guys, and I got some training from some great guys there. And like I said, it was a great experience. I would never change it for the world.
Nice. Yep. Cool. So, if we want to change this system that's so broken, you guys have all been out on the streets. You guys see the real crime. There is crime. You're all shaking your heads. You can all attest to this.
Right.
There is crime.
Sure.
There are criminals. Are our prisons too full with people that don't deserve to be there?
I would answer that with a yes, and believe it or not, I believed that back when I was a cop, and even I was a prosecutor. We have a drug epidemic, and I think there's a lot of people that are committing, and I get appointed to cases where the only crime the person commits over and over and over again is possession of cocaine. And so if they can't afford bail, they're always going to spend. And then this is a Dade County function.
How are they affording cocaine if they can't afford bail?
Well, the bail is a little bit more. The cocaine may be $10, or the rock may be $10, and bail's $500, because that's what they got to come up with. Other than that, they got to come up with $5,000. So, let's say they spend 33 days, and then they'll get convicted of a felony, get credit time served. which is a Dade County function, because in Broward County, by the second or third time, he's probably going to prison.
But this county started a program some years ago, the drug court program. I believe that was started here in Dade County, and it's in a lot of other cities and states now.
It's a great program and it works, but there's a lot of people that come into the system, and that's really, those great programs work for first-time offenders, people, teenagers who are are starting, and people that there's some people whose addiction is so controlling over their life.
Oh yeah.
That they can't function, And
but addiction's not a crime. It's a disease.
But possession,
it's a mental health disease.
Yeah. So I to your earlier point, I think in a lot of these cases, there's 53%. These are statistics. I'm not making this up.
Okay.
I've seen them.
We're going to check you on them.
Yes. They say over 50% of people in prison are in for nonviolent crimes, and so can we come up with a system where certain crimes are decriminalized? I see all the time in Dade County, there's 600 new misdemeanors every day. People go to jail for possession of a natural light because they were in the ordinance, non-alcohol zone of City of Miami, within the limits of the park or what have you. And that person gets a record. And once you take that person to jail 3 or 4 times, now as an employer, you get someone like George to run your background check, and he's like, no, this guy's been arrested 4 times, so he doesn't get the job. So what is he going to do? So it's kind of like a system where it's set up to fail, on petty things that perhaps could be dealt with either with a monetary fine, some other form of less restrictive, punishment.
Right.
Prison. I believe, and I think Detective Nyberg should be reserved for the worst of the worst.
Correct.
People who prey on people who commit crimes. I'm not saying that property crimes aren't important. They are, and people who commit property crimes and burglarize homes, they definitely have the potential.
How often do you guys used to see the repeat offenders?
Oh, tons of times.
Yeah.
When I was working homicide, not necessarily, but robbers, robbers, burglars.
Yeah.
Revolving door.
Yeah, because there's a saying that jail doesn't reform the criminal; it just makes a better criminal.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think from a law enforcement standpoint, you're talking about what changes can be made.
Yeah.
I think unfortunately, police departments have gotten away from the original Sir Robert Peel model of community policing. And I think that was a brilliant model, and we've used it. We used it in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. It works.
What was that method?
And that method is you have to train your people, and you have to have good supervision. You have to train your people that they're problem solvers. They're problem solvers and they're public servants. And they can't forget that. All right? And yeah, you arrest people when they do wrong, but discretion, we talked about discretion. Let's use our heads. Are we spinning our wheels? Are we taking a couple of cops off the road for 4 or 5 hours because of arrests that aren't going to go anywhere in the system and not going to accomplish anything? So I think the model has to be, let's operate in a way that is going to prevent things from happening. Let's operate in a way that the people in our community look to us with confidence, not with fear, not with mistrust. And they should respect us. They should obey the law. But we should be there saying, hey, we're here. This is our community too. We're here to help you solve problems so that they're not problems for us.
Right. We all live here together.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we've gotten away from that. And I think immaturity is a problem on the job.
I was going to say, do you think that a lot of the officers that are on the streets today are a little too sensitive, a little too oversensitive, a little too egotistical?
I don't think, first of all, I think that a lot of departments hire at too young of an age.
Okay.
I think officers need to be a little older, have been around the block a few times, and understand a little bit more about the world before they put on a badge and a gun.
No, look, a 22-year-old doesn't see the world the same way a 32-year-old sees it. That's a fact.
I was 21 when I got on, and that was too young. I'd like to think I did a good job and treated people fairly, but that's not always the case with everybody.
Yeah.
And so when you put a young person in a very highly stressful situation, they might panic, they might revert to whatever belief system they have that's going to help them survive, they may overreact. And we do see that, and then, this whole thing about less than lethal with tasers, it's not always the answer. We did pretty well without tasers when I was on the job. We didn't have tasers.
Yeah, Billy clubs.
We had
Nice
billy
days.
clubs, but you know what? Honestly, speaking for myself and most of the cops I worked with, we did not want to go home with a dirty uniform.
Right.
If you could talk your way out of a situation or talk somebody down, that's what we did.
Better.
I don't want to get in a fight with people.
Did you ever have to draw your weapon during your years?
Many times.
Yeah.
I'd draw my weapon and in many, many situations, never shot anybody, but I've had to use it in that way.
Because it seems logical that maybe to shoot somebody with a taser before you shoot them with a bullet would make a little more sense. A bullet is so like fast and decisive and lethal. Yes,
It's lethal. And I'm not saying tasers are bad. What I'm saying is I think you've got a couple generations of
communication
cops
first
that are just relying on it too fast.
I see. Yeah.
I mean, if there's a housewife who's had too much to drink, or she's a little bit off mentally, and she's giving the guy a hard time and refusing to get out of the car, you gonna tase her? I mean, we would. If you have to grab somebody by the wrist and pull them out of the car, pull them out of the car. I mean, let's do it. Let's go. Get a couple people, get a backup, and do it.
Yeah.
And
Sometimes you have to get physical.
Sometimes you do. And I just think that a lot of discretion has been taken away, and I think you have a lot of people. You have a lot of supervisors on the job now who are young and inexperienced.
Yeah.
And it's a bad cycle,
Yeah, I believe that also. I believe a lot of these police departments are hurrying up the training process and just getting these people in without the proper training. Because we run into a lot of police officers on the street, and they don't even know the law. They're enforcing the law. They don't even know the law.
And the thing that and to talk about Marines have for many years since they were created in Ton Tavern, have been in battle areas
Back in 1775.
Yeah.
with people that wanted November 10th, right?
Yeah.
With people that
Hoorah.
wanted to kill, with people who want to kill them in foreign soil, and yet their track record of shooting unarmed people is a lot better than the police. So there's something that we're doing wrong. I mean, when I pulled my gun lots of times on people on felony stops where I had, my training was, if the car is stolen and there's multiple, or, it's one case, the guy was a triple murder suspect, you got to pull out your gun because you don't want to find out that guy is going to, shoot at you. You already know he's already killed before. But I just see that people are too eager to get involved and to use guns and look at the Marines and our soldiers overseas. You do see from time to time where somebody's done a crime where they've shot an unarmed person. For the most part, their training is based on being able to identify areas and also being able to communicate with people, because they communicate with people who are living in the middle of the turmoil, and they don't know if that person is a victim or a conspirator who's trying to kill them. And so I've always been impressed with the military's ability, and especially the Marines, who are always on the ground, to be able to deal with interactions, with situations that are life-threatening, yet they're not quick to pull the trigger.
Right.
They're and they resolve things. So
One of our training, one of the things that they drill in our head is we can't fire until we get fired on. So a lot of these Marines are waiting to hear that first gunshot so they could pull out their weapon and start firing. But like what he says, it's true. It's a lot of times we come into these neighborhoods and we have young kids coming at us for food or drinks or whatever. And a lot of times these are the little kids that are put a bomb in your backpack. So you have to be careful who you're talking to, who you're coming in contact with, and just because they're little kids or little women or whatever, you don't know who they are, and you have to keep your guard up at all times.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a matter of training. Listen, training and education is clearly a huge thing in every level of this, not only for the people that are policing our communities, but also for the people that live in our communities. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that we all want level of education for our neighbors, because again, we all live here together and we want to have a nice community.
I think the education part of it is so vital. I think that we do a poor job in this country of educating young people as to how their government works, what their role as a citizen in the government is, and how important it is. And they learn a lot of other things, but they're woefully lacking. I know because when I retired, I taught high school for 4 years. I taught criminal justice in high school. And I was amazed at how little they knew about the Constitution, about how things work, and we needed to be better at that.
Yeah, we need to get that reintroduced into school, and that's probably a whole nother show. But and before we wrap up, I just want to hear from you guys real quick. What you think is a good tip for dealing with criminality or criminals in everyday life for the regular person? Like, what's a good way for our listeners if they get confronted with a criminal situation? What's a good tip for them how to deal with that?
Well, I mean, don't fight. Are you talking about being confronted with an aggressive, violent person?
That's one.
If you're being robbed, don't fight. Give it up. There's no amount of money worth your life, and just minimize the amount of time you have with that person. Just do whatever they say at that point. If you're being held at gunpoint or something like that, Other than that, communication is possible in some instances, but in most, crimes happen very quickly. It happens in a matter of a couple seconds and it's over. So fighting against a violent criminal is not a good move.
Prevention, I think, is important too. I mean, a lot of people contribute to their victimization by not knowing where they're at, being attentive to their phone or some other, electronic device or the radio or whatever. You got to know where you're at. There are certain neighborhoods that are worse than others. That's a reality. They're more crime driven than others. That still doesn't mean you should be. You see the articles or you see the news where women will go to the gas station and leave their door unlocked while they walk in with their purse in the car. Well, that's people are following you. Criminals, they have nothing else to do but commit crimes, and they're going to commit crime on the majority of criminals. There are some that are very violent, and they don't care. They want that confrontation. But the most part, most criminals are criminals of opportunities, and they're opportunists. So they're going to wait to see who parks their car, doesn't lock their door, who leaves the purse in the car. No one's going to risk breaking into a car where there's nothing visible if they need a quick, if it's not in the middle of the night, they want to get away with whatever they have quickly. And if there's nothing in the car, they're not going to jump in there. But if you leave your purse unattended, so I think prevention is the most important thing.
Awareness, right?
Awareness of your surroundings. You got to know if you're in a bad neighborhood, the time of night. Right. You got to be looking around and focus on that and on your survival and on making sure you're not a victim or you're not giving someone the opportunity to victimize you.
Right. Yeah, same thing. Just know your surrounding. Know your surrounding. Know where you're at, what city you're at, and if you can run. Go the other way.
Now that's coming from a Marine.
Don't sit there and think that you're going to be able to fight this guy off, and it's not worth it. Like
if
the
you can
detective said,
run.
If you can run.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's like ancient karate information there. All the sensei say, just avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing too with the road rage incidents, somebody honks at you, don't pick a fight with them on the road because people will kill you over a traffic dispute.
It's crazy.
You want to get mad and you want to say stuff back, but you know what? Just ignore them. Who cares if they stick their middle finger at you? Who cares if they yell names at you? Put your music loud.
Yeah, and I think one of those things comes with maturity also. You get older, whatever. And I think also part of that road rage comes from people being so pressured in today's world and being in such a hurry to get somewhere. And I'm running late and I got to get there. And don't you know how important I am? Get that out of my way. And that causes this tension. And that's just perpetuated by things that are happening in our society because, look, we're all under a lot of pressure. And, maybe that'll change someday. And we'll be able to slow down and have more community. And that's always our hope here at Felony Miami, that we can have more hope and more community. And on that, and wrapping up our program, we like to ask our guests a musical question. So, our question is, who's on your playlist? Who are you playing in the car? Who do you got playing at home? Who you listening to music-wise this week?
Oh, wow. To be honest with you, I listen to the radio. I don't have any particular person I listen to. I don't even watch TV.
Song you singing along with?
Wow. Pitbull.
All right. I haven't heard anything new from him in a minute, but go on.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only one that comes to mind right now. Like I said, I don't have time to listen to music or watch
right.
TV. I don't do
You're
either
setting
of
up
those.
surveillance.
I'm either in the office setting up the office for the the investigators, or I'm on the field doing surveillance.
All right.
I really don't have time to watch TV or listen.
Music is the thing that soothes the savage beast. What you
Does.
got, Stephen?
I have a million songs on my playlist, but this week, my 11-year-old son, and he loves Eminem. He keeps playing on my my iTunes on my phone. He keeps playing the new song from Eminem called "River" featuring Ed Sheeran. He likes that song a lot, and he plays Eminem. He likes some of the new modern hip hop guys, and I tend to play the old 80s, freestyle music. I have a collection of all the freestyle, the old Johnny O, Cynthia.
Yeah. Stevie B.
But we have a lot of, me and my son, we have a connection with a lot of, songs that he comes up and says, "Hey, Dad, I love this song. This is the 90s were great." So he played, the other day he was playing Gangster's Paradise by Coolio.
Nice.
And he told me he loved that song. And so we have that connection where most of our music are in tune. I like Eminem too.
Yeah, nothing wrong with him.
I'm going to make people roll their eyes because I'm so stuck in the 70s, man. I'm listening still to Allman Brothers and Eagles and Steely Dan and even Frank Zappa stuff from way back.
Frank Zappa stuff. Wow, that's digging deep.
That's going way
I
back.
like that.
But I have a wide variety of tastes. I mean, I might be listening
Rock and roller at heart.
I might be listening to ZZ Top 1 minute and Bach the next. I mean, it really depends on how I feel.
It's beautiful. Music is a beautiful thing.
Oh, yeah.
It joins us all together. For the Felony Miami team, I'm your host, Joe Stone. Don't forget to check us out online at felonymiami.com. Check us out on Spotify, iTunes, all the RSS feeds. Give us a like, give us a listen, tell your friends about us. We'll see you next time.
Well, it's early in the morning. Then when I ride, Lord and Mama. Well, it's early in the morning.